My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 30 years old, from Chicago, Illinois. The evening started with a familiar feeling of dread. It was a cold Tuesday in November, my dad's 60th birthday, and the five of us were packed into my brother Mark's new German sedan. The car smelled like leather and success, a scent that always made me feel like an imposter. I was squeezed in the back between my sister, Rachel, who was scrolling silently through her phone with a bored expression, and a pile of expensive-looking gifts wrapped in gold paper. In the front, my mother, Evelyn, was talking animatedly to my dad, Richard, about the restaurant she had chosen. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. "It's called The Embers," she said, her voice full of pride. "It has a 3-month waiting list, Richard. I had to call in a favor just to get a table. Only the best for your big day." "That's great, Ev," my dad said. His voice was quiet, as it often was when my mother was in charge. He was a good man, my dad, but he was passive. He let my mother, my brother, and my sister run the show. He never stood up for me. Not really. I stared out the window at the blurry city lights. The dread in my stomach was a heavy, cold stone. Family dinners were always an ordeal. They were a performance where I had a specific role to play, the quiet, unsuccessful daughter, the one who meant well, the one they had to cover for. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the performance was happening on my stage, and they had no idea. The thought sent a terrifying, exhilarating shiver through me. "I hope you're wearing something decent under that coat, Olivia," my mother said, twisting in her seat to look at me. Her eyes scanned my simple black dress. It was elegant and professional, but on me, she only saw cheap. "This isn't one of your little diners." "I'll be fine, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Rachel snorted without looking up from her phone. "Let's hope so. We don't want them thinking we brought the hired help with us." Mark laughed from the driver's seat. "Don't worry, Liv. If you get lost, just start clearing plates. You'll fit right in." The words were meant to be light, a joke, but they landed like tiny, sharp stones. They always did. I didn't say anything back. I had learned a long time ago that fighting back only made it worse. It made me seem too sensitive or unable to take a joke. So I just sat there, clutching my purse on my lap, and pretended I didn't hear them. I pretended it didn't hurt. But inside, I felt that old familiar ache, the feeling of being invisible, the feeling that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. I knew everything about the Embers. I knew the chef's name was Antoine, and he was brilliant with sauces. I knew the maitre d' Julian had a daughter who was studying ballet. I knew the wiring in the main dining room had a tendency to flicker if the dimmers were set too low. I knew these things because I had spent the last 2 years pouring my entire life into this place. Every dollar I had ever saved, every late night, every early morning. The Embers was mine. This secret was the only thing that kept me going through dinners like this. It was a tiny spark of warmth I held close to my chest. As Mark pulled up to the grand entrance, a valet in a sharp red jacket rushed to open the door. The building was beautiful, a historic stone facade with large, glowing windows. It looked warm and inviting, but to my family, it was a symbol of exclusivity, a place they belonged, a place I did not. We all stepped out of the car. My mother immediately started fussing with my dad's tie. Mark handed his keys to the valet with an air of importance, as if he owned the entire block. Rachel was checking her makeup in the reflection of the car window. I just stood back, taking a deep breath of the cold night air, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. Tonight, my two worlds were going to collide, and I had no idea what the explosion would look like. We walked towards the heavy oak doors. I could hear the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses from inside. It was the sound of my dream, a sound I loved. But as we got closer, my mother stopped. She turned and faced me, her expression serious. The others stopped too, watching. We were standing right on the sidewalk, under the warm glow of the entrance lights. "Just a moment," she said. Her eyes traveled from my sensible shoes up to my simple dress, and her lips thinned in disapproval. It was the look I knew well. It was the look that said, "You are an embarrassment." She leaned in, but she kept her voice loud enough for Mark and Rachel to hear clearly. It was a public statement. "Don't embarrass yourself, Olivia," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You can't afford this place. Don't even look at the prices. Just order the chicken or something small. Mark and I will take care of it." The world went quiet. The sounds of the city, the laughter from inside the restaurant, it all faded away. All I heard was the blood pounding in my ears. Heat rushed to my face. It was the same line, the same speech I'd heard 100 times in 100 different ways, but this time it felt different. It felt more cruel, more final. I looked at Mark and Rachel. They were smirking, enjoying the show. I glanced at my dad. He was looking at his shoes, his face a mask of uncomfortable silence. He wouldn't help me. He never did. I felt that familiar wave of shame and anger wash over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to wipe the smug looks off my siblings' faces. But I couldn't. The words were trapped in my throat, choked by years of being told to be quiet, to be small. And then the oak door swung open. It was Julian, my maitre d'. He was a tall, distinguished man with kind eyes. He saw me instantly, and his professional, reserved face broke into a wide, genuine smile. He stepped past my family, ignoring them completely, and walked directly to me. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice warm and clear, ringing out in the cold night air. He paused, his smile never wavering as my mother's eyes widened in confusion. Then he delivered the final, beautiful blow. "We have your private table ready, and the chef has already prepared your favorite wine. Welcome back, our owner." Seeing the shock on my mother's face was like watching a crack form in a thick sheet of ice. Her perfectly composed expression, the one she wore for the public, crumbled into disbelief. Mark and Rachel stood frozen, their smirks gone, replaced by a blank confusion. In that single silent moment, the roles we had played our entire lives were suddenly suspended. And as I looked at them, my mind flooded with the memories that had built the walls between us, brick by painful brick. Growing up in our house in the suburbs of Chicago felt like being a spectator at a sports game where I was the only one who didn't have a team to root for. There were two champions in our family, Mark and Rachel. I was just the one who lived there. Mark, who was 2 years older, was the golden boy. He was smart, ambitious, and from a very young age, my parents decided he was destined for greatness. I remember evenings spent around the dinner table where my father would quiz him on politics or the stock market. Mark would answer with a confidence that seemed unnatural for a teenager, and my parents would exchange proud, knowing glances. His report cards, covered in A's for math and science, were taped to the refrigerator. My own A's, in subjects like art or literature, were met with a simple, "That's nice, dear," before being put away in a drawer. Rachel, a year younger than me, was the princess. She was beautiful, popular, and effortlessly charming. My mother poured all of her social ambitions into Rachel. Her life was a whirlwind of dance recitals, cheerleading practice, and sleepovers with the right group of friends. I remember sitting in my room, trying to read a book, while the sounds of my mother and Rachel laughing filled the hallway as they picked out a dress for a school dance. My mother would spend hours helping Rachel with her hair and makeup, declaring to anyone who would listen, "Isn't she just stunning? She's going to break so many hearts." Rachel's beauty was treated like an accomplishment, a family victory. My quiet hobbies, like baking or reading, were just things I did to pass the time. They were never celebrated. My path was supposed to be simple. Follow in Mark's footsteps, or Rachel's. Get a sensible degree, or marry a successful man. The problem was, neither of those paths felt like mine. I wasn't competitive like Mark, or social like Rachel. I was an observer. I loved watching people. I loved the quiet hum of a well-run restaurant, the unspoken teamwork between the chefs and the servers. I loved the feeling of making someone's day better with a good meal and a warm smile. There was a business to it, a complex and beautiful dance of logistics, management, and human connection. It fascinated me. The day I told my family I wanted to study hospitality management is a memory that is burned into my mind. We were all in the living room. Mark was home from his first year at Northwestern, already talking about internships at major financial firms. Rachel was showing off pictures of her new boyfriend, the captain of the football team. I finally worked up the courage to make my announcement. "I've decided what I want to major in," I said, my voice small. My dad looked up from his newspaper. "Oh, what is it, Liv?" "Hospitality management," I said, trying to sound confident. Silence. Mark was the first to break it, with a short, sharp laugh. "Hospitality? What is that? Are you going to college to learn how to fold napkins?" Rachel giggled. "You mean you want to be a waitress forever?" My mother's face was a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "Olivia, be serious," she said, her voice strained. "Your brother is going into finance. What will people think if you're just serving people? It's not a real career." I tried to explain. I talked about the business side, about management, about logistics, about the dream of one day owning my own establishment. But they weren't listening. They had already decided what my dream meant. It was small. It was beneath them. From that day on, I was officially branded the waitress type. It became a running joke, a label they used to dismiss me. The most painful part was my mother's quiet, constant campaign to lower everyone's expectations of me. Her favorite phrase, which she deployed at family gatherings with neighbors or over the phone, was always the same. "Olivia means well," she would say with a sigh, as if my very existence was a well-intentioned failure. I overheard her once at a neighborhood barbecue. A neighbor had asked what I was up to. "Oh, Olivia's working in restaurants. She's a hard worker. She means well, but she'll never be successful like the others." She said it with a finality that left no room for hope. In her mind, my story was already written. I was the cautionary tale, the simple one, the daughter who would never make her proud. Every time I heard those words, "she means well," it felt like a door slamming shut. It erased all my hard work, all my passion, all my ambition. It reduced me to a kind, simple-minded failure. So I stopped trying to explain. I stopped sharing my small victories, the promotion to shift manager, the bonus I earned for cutting costs, the business plan I was slowly writing in my small apartment late at night. I let them believe I was just a waitress. I let them think I was struggling. I built a separate life, a secret world, where their opinions couldn't reach me. A world where I wasn't Olivia the waitress, but Mrs. Carter, the owner. Now, standing at the entrance of my restaurant, watching their faces, I saw it all. I saw the years of casual cruelty, of thoughtless jokes, of being looked past and looked through. This wasn't just about a restaurant. It was about my entire life. They had written me a story, and tonight I was finally showing going the real one. The years after college were a blur of exhaustion. My life narrowed to two places: the restaurants where I worked and my tiny one-bedroom apartment. I lived in a constant state of motion, fueled by cheap coffee and a stubborn refusal to quit. My days started before the sun came up, checking inventory lists and preparing for the morning shift. They ended long after the last customers had gone home, in the echoing quiet of a closed kitchen, smelling of grease and cleaning supplies. I was a manager, which meant I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. It meant I was the one who had to deal with a cook calling in sick, a freezer breaking down, or a customer who was determined to be unhappy. My body ached constantly. My feet were always sore, and my hands were covered in small cuts and burns. I'd fall into bed at 2 a.m. and feel like I had only closed my eyes for a second before the alarm would blare again. This was the life my family couldn't or wouldn't understand. To them, my work was not a career. It was a phase I needed to get over. I remember calling my mother one Sunday afternoon, a rare hour I had to myself. I was feeling proud. I had just navigated a brutal Saturday night shift where we were short-staffed, and I jumped in to help in the kitchen, washing dishes and plating food to keep everything from falling apart. I had earned the respect of my entire team. I tried to tell her about it. "It sounds chaotic, Olivia," she said, her voice laced with concern that felt more like pity. "Are you sure this is what you want to be doing? Your cousin Jessica just got a job in human resources. Regular hours, benefits. You should think about something like that, something stable." Mark was even more direct. During a Christmas visit, he cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping my mom. He had just gotten a big promotion at his firm. He leaned against the counter, looking at me with a mixture of arrogance and disappointment. "Listen, Liv," he said in his big brother knows best tone. "I'm proud of you for working hard, I guess. But you have a college degree. You're wasting it. Restaurants are a terrible business. The margins are thin, and most of them fail within the first year. You need to get a real job before you get stuck." A real job. The words echoed in my head. Was my 16-hour day not real? Was the responsibility of managing a team of 30 people not real? Was the satisfaction of turning a failing shift into a successful one not real? To them, the only thing that was real was a desk, a salary, and a title they could brag about at dinner parties. Because they couldn't brag about me, they tried to erase the reality of my work altogether. So I stopped talking about it. My life became a secret. While my family saw a tired waitress, I was quietly leading a double life. After my exhausting shifts, I didn't just sleep. I'd make a fresh pot of coffee, sit at my small kitchen table, and open my laptop. That was when the real work began. I studied. I devoured books on business management, marketing, and finance. I analyzed the profit and loss statements of successful restaurants. I created endless spreadsheets, projecting costs, mapping out potential revenue streams, and writing a detailed 50-page business plan. My small apartment, with its flickering fluorescent light, became my university, my headquarters, and my sanctuary. It was the one place I could be myself, a place where my ambition didn't have to be apologized for. Every paycheck felt like a victory. While my siblings were buying new cars and designer clothes, I was living on next to nothing. I wore secondhand clothes, I ate simple meals of pasta and rice, I never went on vacation. Every single spare dollar went into a separate, high-yield savings account that I nicknamed the Escape Fund. Watching that number grow, slowly and painfully, was the most motivating thing in the world. Each dollar was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a life they knew nothing about. The turning point came in the form of Mr. Chen. He was the elderly, quiet owner of the first restaurant I managed. He rarely came in, but when he did, he saw everything. He saw me staying late to mop the floors myself when the cleaning crew didn't show up. He saw me calming down an angry chef and patiently training a new server. One night he found me in the back office poring over the weekly budget reports long after my shift had ended. He didn't say much. He just looked at my notes and asked, "You see the waste in the produce orders, don't you?" I was startled, but I nodded. "Yes, sir. We could cut it by 15% if we adjust the delivery schedule." He smiled, a rare and wonderful thing. After that, he started talking to me. He became my mentor. He had spent 40 years in the business and knew it inside and out. He never pitied me. He challenged me. He tore apart my first draft of my business plan, pointing out every flaw, every weakness. He was tough, but he was the first person in my life who took my dreams seriously. He saw the fire in me that my own family mistook for dirt. A year later, he called me. He said, "I found something. An old steakhouse downtown, prime location. The owners ran it into the ground. It's a mess, but it has good bones." He took me to see the Embers. It was even better and worse than he had described. The velvet seats were torn, the beautiful mahogany bar was covered in dust, and the kitchen was a disaster. It was failing. But I saw what it could be. I saw the high ceilings and the beautiful architecture. I could almost hear the sound of happy customers and smell the aroma of perfectly cooked steaks. I felt it in my gut. This was it. Mr. Chen co-signed the loan, investing his own money alongside my entire life savings. He said, "This is on you now. Don't mess it up." Those 2 years of owning the Embers were the hardest and most rewarding of my life, and I did it all in secret. To my family, I was still just Olivia, the struggling waitress. And I let them believe it. I needed to. I needed to succeed on my terms without their judgment or their fake backhanded support. I needed to prove to myself that the girl they saw wasn't the real me. And tonight, for the first time, they were finally seeing it. The invitation arrived, as most family announcements did, in a group text message. I was at the Embers, sitting in my small, cluttered office in the basement reviewing the previous night's sales reports. My phone buzzed on the desk, a cheerful, intrusive sound in the quiet of the morning. It was from my mother. The message was written in all capital letters, a sure sign that she was bursting with self-satisfaction. "Huge news, everyone," it read. "For your father's 60th birthday, I have managed to secure a reservation at the Embers. It's the most exclusive steakhouse in Chicago. I had to pull so many strings. Tuesday the 18th at 7 p.m. Dress code is strictly elegant. Be ready to be impressed." I stared at my phone. The words seemed to blur. The Embers. My restaurant. My sanctuary. The place I had poured every last drop of my energy and soul into for 2 solid years. My mother, the woman who thought my greatest ambition was to serve chicken wings, had chosen my restaurant as the pinnacle of success, the ultimate status symbol to celebrate my father. The irony was so thick, so impossibly perfect, it felt like a scene from a movie. My heart started to beat a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. My first instinct was a wild, hysterical urge to laugh. My second was to type back the truth. "That's my restaurant, Mom." 3 simple words that would change everything. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. Mark replied first. "Sounds good. Heard it's impossible to get into." Then Rachel. "Ooh, fancy. I have the perfect dress for that. What's the lighting like? I need to know for pictures." I watched their messages pop up, one after the other. They were excited. They were impressed. They were completely, blissfully unaware. The temptation to tell them was a physical force, a pressure building in my chest. I imagined their reactions. The shock, the disbelief, the inevitable accusations. "Why didn't you tell us? Were you trying to make us look stupid?" They would find a way to twist it, to make my success a secret I had kept from them, an act of malice. They would try to steal the moment, to make it about their feelings, their surprise. And suddenly, my decision became crystal clear. I would say nothing. This wasn't about revenge, not in a loud or angry way. It was about clarity. For my entire life, they had told me who I was. They had written my story, cast me in a role I never auditioned for, and refused to see me as anything else. Now, fate had handed me the pen. I had the chance to let them walk onto my stage and play their parts, unaware that I was the director. It was a quiet, almost scientific curiosity that took hold of me. I wanted to see it. I wanted to watch the story unfold, to see what would happen when their version of me collided with the truth. For once, I would be in control. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct call from my mother. I took a deep breath and answered, smoothing my voice into a calm, neutral tone. "Olivia, dear, did you see my text?" she asked, her voice bright and chirpy. "I did, Mom. It sounds nice," I said, looking around my office. The framed copy of our first glowing review hung on the wall behind me. "Nice? Olivia, it's magnificent. People wait months for a table there. I just wanted to call you personally to make sure you understand. This isn't like those little bistros you work at. It's a very serious place. You'll need to wear something appropriate." I almost smiled. "I'll find something, Mom." "Good," she said, her tone softening into one of condescending concern. "And listen, I don't want you to worry about the prices on the menu. Just looking at them will probably give you a heart attack. It's going to be astronomically expensive, but it's a special occasion for your father. Mark and I will be handling the bill, of course. You just focus on enjoying yourself, and please try not to feel out of place. Try not to feel out of place. The words hung in the air long after she had hung up. I was being coached on how to behave in my own establishment, warned not to be intimidated by the prices I myself had set. The absurdity of it all solidified my resolve. This was a test, and I was determined to see it through. In the days leading up to the dinner, I lived in a state of heightened awareness. At work, I pulled my maitre d' aside. Julian. He was more than an employee. He was a trusted friend who had been with me since the beginning. Julian, I said, my voice low. You'll see a reservation for Tuesday night, a party of 5 under the name Carter. He nodded, checking his tablet. I see it. A VIP note from your mother? He raised an eyebrow. I sighed. That's my family. And Julian, they have no idea that I own this place. His eyes widened in surprise, followed by a slow smile. Are you serious? Completely. And I'd like to keep it that way, at least for a while. I need you and the staff to treat us like any other table. No special attention, no acknowledgments. Just treat me like a normal guest. Can you make sure everyone understands? Consider it done, Miss Carter, he said, a glint of amusement in his eye. The performance of a lifetime. On the evening of my father's birthday, I stood in front of my closet, a strange calm settling over me. I didn't choose a flashy dress or anything that would scream for attention. I picked out a simple, elegant black sheath dress, the one my mother would later call cheap. It was understated. It was confident. It was me. As I got ready, I felt like I was preparing for a battle, but a quiet one. There would be no shouting, no fighting. My victory wouldn't be in what I said, but in the undeniable truth of what I had built. As I walked out the door to meet them, I felt a sense of peace. The dread that usually accompanied these family gatherings was gone, replaced with a quiet, steady anticipation. The curtain was about to go up. The moment we stepped through the heavy oak doors of the Embers, the outside world fell away. The air inside was warm and smelled of wood smoke, rosemary, and the rich, decadent aroma of perfectly cooked steak. The lighting was low and intimate, casting a golden glow on the dark wood panels and plush velvet booths. The quiet, confident murmur of conversation, punctuated by the soft clinking of glasses and silverware, filled the space. To my family, this was the sound of money and exclusivity. To me, it was the sound of my dream coming to life. My mother, Evelyn, stopped just inside the doorway and took a deep, theatrical breath. "Oh my," she whispered, her eyes wide with approval as she scanned the dining room. "Richard, look! This is what I call a real restaurant, true elegance." My father nodded, looking genuinely impressed. Mark, ever the financier, appraised the room with a critical eye. "Good crowd for a Tuesday," he commented, nodding. "This place must be printing money." Rachel was already pulling her phone out, turning slightly to find the most flattering angle. "The lighting in here is incredible," she said, more to her reflection than to any of us. I hung back, watching them. A strange sense of detachment washed over me as I saw my restaurant through their eyes for the first time. I saw Maria, my wonderful hostess, standing at the lectern. Her smile was warm and professional. I saw Sam, my head bartender, expertly mixing a cocktail, the silver shaker flashing under the lights. I saw the flower arrangements on the bar, the ones I had personally approved just this morning. Every detail they were admiring was a decision I had made, a problem I had solved, a piece of a puzzle I had painstakingly assembled. I felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a pang of anxiety. They were invaders in my secret world. Maria's eyes met mine over my mother's shoulder. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. She understood immediately. Her professional smile didn't waver as she looked back down at her reservation list, ready to play her part. Let's go, my mother urged, moving forward with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged anywhere she chose to be. She led our small procession toward the host stand where Maria was waiting. Just as my mother reached the lectern, she seemed to remember I was there. She stopped and turned around, her expression shifting from impressed guest to managing parent. The look on her face was one I knew all too well. It was the look that preceded a public correction, a quiet lecture designed to put me back in my place. "Olivia, come here for a second," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise. I stepped forward, my stomach tightening. Mark and Rachel paused, turning to watch. They knew this routine. My mother gestured vaguely at a menu displayed on the lectern. "I was just looking at the menu again. The prices are even higher than I remembered." She shook her head as if personally offended by the cost. "So before we are seated, I want to be very clear." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was perfectly audible to everyone around us. "Olivia, don't bother looking at the menu when they give it to you. Just order something small, maybe a salad or the chicken entree. You simply can't afford this place, and I don't want you to embarrass yourself by staring at the prices all night long. It would be uncivilized." The words landed like physical blows. The warm, proud feeling I had had moments before evaporated, replaced by a familiar hot flush of shame. The air in my lungs felt thin. Beside me, I heard Mark let out a low, condescending chuckle. "Mom's right, Liv," he said, shaking his head with a pitying smile. "Don't worry, we'll cover you. Just try not to get carried away and order the lobster, okay?" Rachel, without even looking up from her phone, added, "Seriously, it would be so awkward if your card got declined. We'll take care of our little sister." The way she said "little sister" was dripping with patronage, a deliberate reminder of my place in the family hierarchy, even though she was younger than me. I stood there, a captive audience to my own humiliation. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could feel Maria's gaze on us, her expression carefully neutral. I wanted the polished floor to swallow me whole. I wanted to tell them that I had personally set every price on that menu. I had negotiated with the suppliers for the lobster Mark was joking about. I had hired the chef who created the chicken dish my mother was assigning to me. Every single thing they were using to belittle me was, in fact, mine. But I couldn't say a word. The old habits were too strong. So I did what I always did. I forced a smile. I felt the muscles in my cheeks pull into an unnatural shape. It felt like a mask, and I hoped it wouldn't crack. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Thanks." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked past her at my father. He was staring intently at a painting on the far wall, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, pretending he couldn't hear anything. His silence was his answer. It always was. Satisfied that she had done her duty, my mother turned back to the hostess. "Carter," she announced proudly, "party of 5. And in that moment, as she waited to be led into the heart of my creation, she had no idea that the foundation of her world was about to crack. My mother, satisfied that my public lesson was complete, turned back to the hostess with a triumphant smile. "Carter," she announced, her voice full of authority, "party of 5. The reservation should be for 7 o'clock. Maria, my hostess, offered a polite smile, her eyes briefly flickering toward me with a look of shared understanding. She was about to speak, to lead us to a standard table in the main dining room, as I had instructed, when a new presence altered the energy at the front of the restaurant. It was Julian, my maitre d'. He was moving from the back of the dining room with a swift, purposeful stride, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit. He moved with an effortless grace and authority that my mother, a connoisseur of such things, would instantly recognize and respect. His eyes were fixed on me. He didn't even glance at my mother, who was standing directly in his path, expecting to be greeted as the most important person in the room. He bypassed her completely, a subtle but significant maneuver that caused a flicker of confusion to cross her face. He stopped directly in front of me, his expression breaking from its usual professional neutrality into a smile of genuine warmth and deference. The look in his eyes was one of sincere respect, a look no one in my family had ever given me. "Ms. Carter," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was pitched with a perfect practice clarity that cut through the restaurant's ambient murmur. The formal title, Ms. Carter, hung in the air, a stark contrast to the dismissive "Liv" I had been hearing all night. For a split second, my mother's posture straightened, assuming he was addressing her, but Julian's focus remained solely, intently on me. "Welcome back," he continued, his smile widening. The first crack in my family's collective composure appeared. Welcome back? The phrase implied a history, a familiarity that didn't fit their narrative of me. I could feel my brother Mark's eyes narrow slightly, trying to process this new, unexpected data point. Julian wasn't finished. "Your private table is ready," he said, gesturing deeper into the restaurant, toward the coveted, secluded alcove that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. "And the chef has prepared your favorite wine. He sends his apologies that he couldn't greet you personally at the door. There was a small issue with the sauce for the evening special." Every word was a perfectly placed stone, methodically demolishing the foundation of my family's reality. Your private table, not a table. Your favorite wine. The chef sends his apologies. This wasn't the polite service given to a valued customer. This was the deference shown to an owner, a superior. This was a level of treatment that my mother, with all her supposed connections, could only dream of. Time seemed to slow down. The murmur of the dining room faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I could see were the faces of my family, frozen in a tableau of shared shock. My mother's proud smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed, vacant expression. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, darted from Julian's smiling face to my own, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. The color seemed to drain from her cheeks. Mark's confident smirk had vanished completely. His eyebrows were knitted together in a tight line of concentration, his mind visibly scrambling to reconcile the scene with a lifetime of believing I was a failure. Beside him, Rachel was for the first time all evening completely still. Her phone was forgotten in her hand, her mouth slightly agape as she stared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. Even my father, who had been so studiously examining the restaurant's decor, had turned. His gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw not just discomfort, but utter bewilderment. He looked at me as if he had never truly seen me before. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon our small group. It felt like an eternity, though it could have only been a few seconds. Finally, my mother's spell of shock was broken. She took a tiny, stuttering step toward me. Her voice, which had been so crisp and commanding just moments before, was now a fragile, broken whisper. "What?" she stammered, shaking her head slightly as if to clear it. Did he just call you?" She couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes were pleading, begging me to give her an explanation that made sense, an answer that would restore the world to the way it was supposed to be. The power in our family had, in the span of 30 seconds, fundamentally and irrevocably shifted. She was no longer the one with the answer. She was asking me. My heart was still pounding, but it was no longer with shame or fear. It was a wild, steady beat of adrenaline, of vindication. All the years of being dismissed, of being underestimated, of swallowing my anger and my hurt, all led to the single, quiet moment. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to recite my accomplishments. I didn't need to say a single word. I met my mother's gaze. I held it. And then, slowly, deliberately, I nodded. Just once. The gesture was small, but it was absolute. It confirmed everything. It answered every unspoken question. I let the silence that followed my nod stretch out, letting the full weight of the truth settle upon them. I let them stand there, in the entrance of my restaurant, and grapple with the stunning, undeniable fact that the person they thought they knew didn't exist at all. The moment after my nod was the quietest I have ever experienced with my family. Julian, a master of his craft, didn't let the awkward, frozen silence linger for too long. With a discreet and practiced grace, he said, "This way, please," and gestured for us to follow him. The spell was broken. We began to move. The walk through the main dining room felt surreal. It was like walking through a dream. My family, who had entered the restaurant with such swagger and confidence, now followed me in a stunned, silent procession. My mother, usually the one leading the charge, walked with a strange stiffness, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing everything for the first time through a new and confusing lens. Mark and Rachel walked with their heads slightly bowed, their usual confidence completely stripped away. They looked like children who had been called into the principal's office. My father simply looked lost. I, on the other hand, had never felt more grounded. I walked through the room, my room, and felt a sense of belonging that was deep and resonant. I offered a small, discreet nod to a waiter I passed. I noticed that a candle on table 7 had gone out and made a mental note to mention it to the staff later. This place was an extension of me, and for the first time, my family was seeing it. They were seeing me. Julian led us to the best table in the entire restaurant. It was a large, circular booth in a semi-private stone alcove, set before a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking, glittering panorama of the Chicago skyline. It was the table my mother would have read about in magazines, the one she would have boasted about to her friends for months if she had managed to book it. With a flourish, Julian pulled out a chair. Not for my mother, the matriarch, or my father, the guest of honor, but for me. It was a small gesture, but it was a clear and deliberate shattering of our family's unspoken protocol. I sat, and the rest of my family awkwardly shuffled into their seats around me. The silence that settled over our table was thick and heavy. The usual cheerful dinner chatter was absent. No one seemed to know what to say. My mother clutched her menu like a shield, but I could see she wasn't actually reading it. Mark was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw tight. Before anyone could speak, the sommelier, a kind man named David, approached. He, too, directed his attention solely to me. "Ms. Carter," he said smoothly, "the Sancerre you enjoy is chilling. Shall I pour for the table, or would your guests prefer to see the wine list?" My mother, who prided herself on her knowledge of French wines, looked up, startled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was so used to being the one to interface with sommeliers, to be the expert. Now she was irrelevant. "The Sancerre will be perfect, David, thank you. I think everyone will enjoy it." David nodded and bustled away. A moment later, our waiter arrived with menus. He handed them to my parents and my siblings, but not to me. "Ms. Carter," he said with a polite smile, "Chef Antoine has already prepared a tasting menu for you this evening, of course. Would your guests be joining you in the tasting menu, or will they be ordering a la carte?" Again, the power dynamic was clear. I was not a guest. I was the host. My will was the default. My family looked at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and helplessness. They were completely unmoored, adrift in a world where none of their usual rules applied. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet. "The tasting menu sounds lovely." The final, undeniable proof came a few minutes later. A tall, imposing figure in a crisp white chef's coat emerged from the kitchen. It was Chef Antoine Dubois, a man whose culinary genius had earned him rave reviews across the city. My mother gasped softly. She followed chefs the way other people followed movie stars. Antoine strode directly to our table. He ignored everyone else. He came to my side and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Olivia," he said, his French accent thick and warm. "Bonsoir. I am glad you could make it in tonight. Is everything to your liking?" The use of my first name, the familiar touch on my shoulder, it was a gesture of a colleague, a friend, not of a chef greeting a patron. Antoine, it's all perfect. Thank you so much for coming out. I'd like you to meet my family. This is my father, Richard. It's his birthday. My mother, Evelyn, and my siblings, Mark and Rachel. Antoine gave them a brief professional nod. A pleasure, he said, his focus quickly returning to me. My kitchen will take very good care of you tonight. Enjoy. And with that, he was gone, leaving another stunned silence in his wake. That was the final straw. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. I saw Rachel lean forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the table. Her face was pale, and her eyes, usually so dismissive and bored when they looked at me, were now wide with a frantic, dawning comprehension. She leaned across the table, her voice a low, intense whisper, a hiss of pure disbelief. She started, her eyes locked on mine. You own this place? The question hung in the air, vibrating with the weight of a lifetime of assumptions. All eyes were on me. My mother, my father, my brother, they were all waiting, breathless for my answer. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down gently. I looked at Rachel, then let my gaze travel around the table, meeting the eyes of each member of my family. I held all the power, all the cards. There was no need for anger, no need for triumph. There was only the quiet, unshakable truth. Yes, I said, my voice perfectly calm and even. I let the words sink in, letting them absorb its full impact. Then I delivered the final, undeniable detail. The 2 years I mentioned seemed to echo in the space between us, creating a chasm that was deeper and wider than the city lights twinkling outside our window. It wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about the time. 2 years of holidays, birthdays, and casual Sunday phone calls. 2 years of their condescending advice and my quiet deflections. 2 years of them pitying my struggle while I was negotiating with vendors, designing menus, managing a staff of 50, and building a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The lie wasn't the one I had kept. It was the one they had told themselves about me. The first course of our tasting menu arrived, a testament to the impeccable timing of my staff. Beautifully seared scallops were placed before each of them. The plates were works of art. The food was, I knew, exquisite. But no one moved to eat. They just stared at the plates as if they couldn't comprehend them. It was my mother, Evelyn, who finally broke. She was a woman who could not tolerate a social vacuum. Her entire identity was built on smoothing over uncomfortable moments and controlling the narrative. A short, brittle laugh escaped her lips. It was a terrible sound, high-pitched and completely hollow, the sound of pure panic trying to disguise itself as amusement. "Well," she exclaimed, her voice strained. She looked around the table, desperately seeking an ally, but found only stunned silence. "Isn't that something? My goodness! 2 years!" She picked up her fork, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Well, of course we're proud of you, Olivia. So proud." She aimed a wobbly smile in my direction. We just didn't know. You kept it all a secret, you sly thing." She tried to frame it as a playful game I had been hiding. She was trying to reclaim the story, to paint me as a mischievous child and herself as the delighted, surprised parent. It was a desperate, flimsy attempt to paper over the vast canyon of her own ignorance. But I didn't need to argue or correct her. I just needed to look at her. And for the first time, I saw past the carefully constructed facade of the proud matriarch. I saw the raw, undiluted shame in her eyes. It was a deep, painful humiliation that went far beyond this dinner. This was the woman who had loudly declared just an hour ago that I couldn't afford to eat here. This was the woman who had built a part of her social identity on the narrative of her two successful children and the one who meant well. Now she was a guest in the very establishment she had used as a benchmark for a success she believed was far beyond my reach. She was dining on the fruits of the labor she had mocked for years. Her judgment, the foundation upon which she built her world, was worthless. She wasn't proud. She was mortified. I shifted my gaze to my brother. Mark sat in uncharacteristic silence. His smugness, the armor he had worn his entire life, was gone. There was no condescending smile, no "I told you so" lecture. He was just staring at his plate, his fork frozen in his hand. Mark was a man who understood value. He lived in a world of profit margins, assets, and returns on investment. He had lectured me about how restaurants were a failing business, a waste of a good degree. And now he was sitting inside what was clearly a phenomenally successful investment, a thriving asset. He wasn't just looking at a restaurant. He was looking at a level of success that he, with all his financial savvy, had to respect. But it was a success achieved by the one person he had never respected at all. He was quiet because his entire worldview had been upended. The family hierarchy, with him at the top, had just been redrawn, and he was struggling to find his new place on the map. And then there was Rachel, my beautiful social sister who measured a person's worth by their Instagram feed and the parties they were invited to. She was also silent, her phone completely forgotten beside her plate. She was looking around the restaurant, at the elegant crowd, the chic decor, the attentive staff. This was the ultimate social currency. Owning the Embers wasn't just a successful business, it was a status symbol of the highest order. The sister she had been embarrassed to be seen with was now by a staggering margin the most influential person she knew. The shame on her face was different from my mother's. It was the shame of having miscalculated, of having backed the wrong horse, of realizing that the person she had dismissed as irrelevant was in fact the one holding all the power. They each picked up their forks and began to eat, but it was a mechanical act. No one commented on the food. No one spoke. The silence was filled with the deafening sound of their own thoughts, their own regrets, and the slow, painful process of recalibrating a lifetime of assumptions. In the center of that storm, I took a bite of my scallop. It was perfectly cooked. It tasted like victory. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a strange, muted pantomime of a family celebration. Course after exquisite course arrived at our table, each one a testament to Chef Antoine's genius, but the food was almost an afterthought. We ate in a thick, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clinking of our silverware against the plates. My mother attempted, a few times, to make conversation, offering stiff, formal compliments on the food. The sea basses, very well prepared, she would say to no one in particular. It sounded less like a compliment and more like a concession. I didn't try to fill the silence. For the first time in my life, I felt no obligation to manage their feelings, to smooth over the awkwardness. I simply existed in the space I had created. I watched them, not with the lingering anger or hurt of a wounded daughter, but with a new, quiet clarity. I saw them for what they were. People trapped in a story they had told themselves for so long, they had forgotten it wasn't the truth. My mother, who needed to be the most important person in every room. My brother, who needed to be the most successful. My sister, who needed to be the most admired. In their rigid world, there had been no room for me to be anything other than what they had decided I was. There was a sadness in that, but it was a distant sadness. It was no longer my burden to carry. When the dessert plates were cleared, the lights dimmed slightly. 2 waiters approached our table with a small, elegant chocolate lava cake, a single flickering candle in its center. They placed it in front of my father. They began to sing Happy Birthday. My family joined in, their voices thin and reedy, a hollow echo of a familiar ritual. It was the saddest birthday song I had ever heard. My dad looked at the candle, then at me. His eyes were filled with a profound and complicated mix of emotions: pride, shame, and a deep, aching regret. He was a man who had stood by silently for 30 years while my spirit was slowly chipped away. I knew in that moment that he would never say the words I had once so desperately needed to hear. He would never say, "I'm sorry, I should have stood up for you." And I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I didn't need them anymore. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said in a voice full of a genuine, uncomplicated warmth that surprised even me. He gave me a weak, grateful smile and blew out the candle. A moment later, Mark, falling back into his old role of the one in charge, began searching for the waiter. "We should get the check," he said, a statement that was also a question. "There's no check," I said quietly. "It's all been taken care of." My words were another quiet assertion of a truth they couldn't deny. This was my home. They were my guests. This wasn't a transaction. It was a gift. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it again. There was nothing she could say. As we all stood to leave, I walked over to Julian and Chef Antoine, who were standing near the kitchen entrance. In full view of my family, I thanked them both, not as a customer, but as their boss. I thanked them for the wonderful meal and for their hard work. The warmth and respect in their replies were genuine. It was a final, effortless demonstration of the world I had built, a world of mutual respect and shared passion. We walked out of the restaurant and back into the cold November night. The valet was bringing Mark's car around. We stood on the sidewalk, the five of us, surrounded by the noise of the city, but wrapped in our own profound silence. The spell of the evening was broken, and the weight of our new reality seemed to crash down upon my mother. She stood beside me, not looking at me, but staring at the revolving glass door of the restaurant. Her face was a mask of tightly controlled emotion. Then in a low mutter, a resentful whisper aimed at the air between us, she said the words she had been holding back all night. "You could have told us." It was the last, desperate attempt to make this my fault, to shift the blame for her own blindness onto me. The Olivia of a year ago would have crumpled. She would have felt a rush of guilt or a surge of anger. She would have defended herself, listing all the reasons why she had stayed silent. But I wasn't that Olivia anymore. I stopped and turned to face her. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. I looked at my mother's face, at the lines of bitterness and wounded pride etched around her mouth. I felt nothing but a deep, weary calm. The storm inside me was finally over. I replied softly, my voice devoid of any anger or triumph. It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of a fact that had defined my entire life. You never would have listened to me. The words hung in the cold night air. They were the truest thing I had ever said to her. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. She had no reply. There was nothing more to say. In the periphery, I saw my father look down at the ground, the truth of my words landing on him with a visible weight. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. My story was no longer tied to theirs. I gave my father's arm a final, gentle squeeze, nodded a quiet goodbye to my siblings, and turned. I walked away from the curb, leaving them standing in the harsh glow of the valet stand. I didn't know where their story would go from here, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I was walking into the quiet peace of my own life, a life that I had built not in spite of them, but simply, finally, for me. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong in silence? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is quiet success.